They enter the dense layer of clouds. During their final approach, the pilots become distracted and, without realizing it, head straight toward the planet's highest peaks. The crash becomes inevitable. What exactly happened? This is what has been reconstructed. On July 31, 1992, from Thailand's International Airport, an Airbus A310 was scheduled to operate Thai Airways Flight 311, connecting Bangkok with Kathmandu, Nepal. The aircraft was nearly 5 years old. Its first flight had been on October 2, 1987, and it entered commercial service with a Canadian company on January 15, 1990. It was powered by two General Electric CF-6 engines and carried 99 passengers, along with 14 crew members, including the pilots. Captain Espreta Sutame, 41, had accumulated 13,200 flight hours, of which 4,400 were on the A310 and 1,700 as a captain in command. His co-pilot, Punta Dyer, 52, had 14,600 flight hours, with 4,200 on the same aircraft model. At 10:30 a.m., Flight 311 took off from Bangkok, with an expected arrival in Kathmandu at 12:55 p.m. local time. After an uneventful takeoff and climb, the flight was cruising and began communicating with Kathmandu Air Traffic Control. They were flying over a sky reference point called Manda, and calculated they would soon reach another waypoint named Romeo, from which they would start the approach to the airport. At 12:18, they requested permission to begin their descent, but received no immediate response. After 3 failed attempts, the controller finally authorized the descent from 35,000 feet. 5 minutes later, at 12:23, it was reported that rain had covered the airport, and visibility to the south was barely 1,500 meters. A critical problem, since the direct approach to runway 02 requires at least 3,000 meters of visibility. The procedure for runway 02 involves starting at Romeo, following the 202-degree radial, and reaching the runway via a point called Sierra, located 10 miles away. There was no equivalent procedure for runway 20 due to the elevated terrain to the north, so landing in that direction required a complicated circling maneuver under visual conditions, increasing the risk of an accident and the crew's stress. Since visibility to the south was insufficient, the controller suggested performing the circling approach to runway 20. The pilots were not satisfied. The first officer requested to maintain the approach to runway 02. But after confirmation that it was not possible, they finally accepted the maneuver toward runway 20. Although their real intention was to divert to their alternate airport in Calcutta, India. At 12:27, Flight 311 was over the Romeo point. Located on the 202 radial from Kathmandu Airport, and received clearance to descend to 11,500 feet. The crew contacted the controller again to confirm the weather conditions and was informed that runway 02 was now clear and available. At 12:31, the controller cleared the approach from the Sierra point to runway 02, requesting that they report when they were 10 miles out and at 9,500 feet altitude. Meanwhile, the pilots began preparing the aircraft for the landing maneuver. The first officer moved the flap lever to 15 degrees, but the flaps did not respond. He tried setting them to 20 degrees, but they still did not deploy. The captain realized that landing without full flap extension would be impossible. At 12:33, the captain called the tower requesting to maintain 10,500 feet and return to Calcutta due to a technical problem. However, just 21 seconds later, the pilots managed to fix the flap malfunction. They decided to continue the approach, although the altitude was already too high for a direct landing. They requested a left turn to return to the Romeo point and retry the approach. The captain made 4 calls to the controller without receiving a response. As they neared the airport, approximately 10 kilometers away, and without communication with the tower, he chose to turn right since they had previously been informed that another aircraft was on the left. Using the autopilot, the crew turned the plane to the right and began climbing from 10,500 to 18,000 feet, while the first officer tried to locate the Romeo point on the flight computer. The controller finally instructed them to descend again to 11,500 feet due to the presence of another aircraft at a higher altitude. The workload in the cockpit increased significantly. The pilots were trying to coordinate the new approach, communicate with the controller, and locate the Romeo point simultaneously. During this process, the captain, without visual reference and unaware, completed a 360-degree turn, placing the aircraft back on a northern heading directly toward the highest mountains. The first officer noticed a concerning indication and asked the captain if they were heading north. The question did not convey the real urgency, and the captain believed it referred to the moment of starting the descent, replying that they would soon correct the course. When the co-pilot requested a right turn to return to the airport, the ground proximity warning system activated, issuing constant alerts. In the final seconds, the co-pilot insisted on turning around, but the captain still believed they were south of the airport. Moments later, the enormous mountain appeared through the clouds directly in their path, and the impact was inevitable. Nepalese authorities conducted an investigation and determined that the accident was primarily due to a loss of situational awareness by both the captain and the air traffic controller. Technical factors, language barriers, and workload created extreme stress in the cockpit. The investigation also highlighted the lack of initiative by the first officer, who did not intervene clearly or provide precise responses to the captain's instructions. Furthermore, it was discovered that the air traffic controller was inexperienced and had limited English proficiency, causing him to ignore several critical communications and failed to maintain safe separation from the elevated terrain. The investigation further concluded that the airline had not provided specific simulator training for the complex approach to Kathmandu, leaving the crew without the necessary practice to handle the difficulties of this maneuver. In summary, the combination of human errors, communication problems, technical issues, and lack of preparation for the critical approach proved fatal. None of the 113 people on board survived the impact. After the crash, rescue teams based their search on the controller's reports, which indicated the plane was south of the airport and that the last recorded position was 14 DME, delaying the location of the wreckage. When investigators from Nepal, Thailand, and France arrived, they found remote and difficult to access terrain. It required a 5-hour trek from a base camp or a descent from a high-altitude helipad. The harsh conditions affected the team. British pilot Gordon Corr, Airbus representative, died from altitude sickness. Only the 2 black boxes and some human remains were recovered. Captain Sudamai confused the aircraft's position and believed he needed to return to the Romeo point, creating a misunderstanding with air traffic control. Worsened by the language barrier, the controllers with limited English could not clarify the situation or properly authorize maneuvers, repeating instructions that increased confusion. This raised the captain's workload, as he assumed radio duties normally handled by the first officer. After 4 failed attempts to get permission for a left turn, he prematurely turned right without coordination. He then turned the heading selector until completing a full 360 degrees, believing it was 180, placing the aircraft on a northern heading directly toward the mountains. His confusion was reinforced by confirmation bias, interpreting the instruments according to his mistaken perception. He did not realize he was flying toward an area with a minimum altitude of 21,000 feet, while maintaining 11,500. Although it could have been corrected, neither he nor the first officer perceived the loss of situational awareness. The final minutes focused on trying to display the Romeo point on the FMS. When the first officer detected the wrong heading, only 30 seconds remained until impact. The accident provided lessons on simplifying workload, improving air traffic controllers' English, and maintaining situational awareness. In Langtang National Park, a Buddhist stupa was erected in 1993 in memory of the 113 victims. Photographs show the smoking crater and fragments of the fuselage. Today, the wreckage remains visible between Gopte and Tirupati, a somber reminder for hikers. At Tribhuvan International Airport, a commemorative plaque was installed in 1994, listing the victims' names. Airways Flight 311 serves as a reminder of the importance of communication, technology, and preparation in aviation.